The morning began like any other for Elellanena Morrison. The world was still asleep when she pulled on her wool coat, the one her late husband Harold used to wear when he went fishing in the early dawns of their younger years. It hung a little loose on her small frame, smelling faintly of cedar and old soap. Outside, the air was sharp enough to make her cheeks sting. Frost shimmered along the fence line, and the first light of day painted the snow a pale silver. Her old cabin sat at the edge of Pine Valley, high enough that the town lights below looked like quiet stars. She locked her door out of habit, even though no one ever came this far up. Her boots crunched the thin layer of ice that had formed overnight as she started her daily walk along the ridge road. At 78, most folks in town thought she was half crazy to walk alone that early, but it was the only time she felt at peace. No chatter, no engines, just the mountain breathing. "Morning, Miss Morrison," a voice called from behind. She turned to see young Billy Nance from the next cabin down, loading firewood into his truck. "Morning, Billy," she said, raising her gloved hand. "You're up before the sun, too," he smiled. "Trying to beat the snow. My wife says it's coming again." "Tell her she's probably right," Elellanena said, her breath rising in white clouds. "Stay warm." She waved and continued on, the slope ahead dipping into a bend where the trees grew close together. The road curved sharply where the mountain shadow lingered longest. Here, the air was colder. She paused for a moment to stretch her legs, watching her breath drift away like smoke. That was when she noticed the black streaks on the pavement, 2 long skid marks carved deep into the frost. Her heartbeat quickened. The marks ended near the guardrail, where the snow was broken and splattered with bits of glass. Something metallic caught the faint light, the side mirror of a motorcycle. She stepped closer and saw 2 bikes down in the ditch, twisted and still. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen between fear and instinct. "Dear Lord," she whispered. The wind carried a low groan from below. Someone was alive. Without thinking, she climbed down, gripping branches for balance. The smell of oil, wet leather, and blood mingled in the cold air. 2 men lay there, both wearing heavy jackets with the same patch on the back. A skull with wings. She recognized it from the news. The Hells Angels. One man, the bigger of the 2, had blood on his temple. The other's lips were blue, his chest rising shallowly. For a heartbeat, the name of the group froze her in place. She'd heard stories about them, the fights, the trouble, but then another sound came, a small gasp, thin as a thread. That was all it took. She crouched beside them, fingers moving automatically, checking pulses, breath, the firmness of skin. Old muscle memory stirred. She hadn't done field triage since Korea, but her body remembered. "You're all right," she murmured, though she wasn't sure it was true. "You just stay with me." One man's eyelids fluttered. His voice came out rough. "Leave us, lady. We'll be fine." She ignored him, pulling off her scarf to cover the other's neck. "You'll be dead before sunrise if I leave you here." Her mind calculated distances. The hospital was 30 miles down the valley. Even if she called now, it'd take an hour for help to reach this road. They'd freeze long before that. Her small cabin, though, barely a mile uphill. "God help me," she muttered, already moving to make it happen. Back at her cabin, she found the old snow sled Harold had built from scrap wood. It was meant for hauling firewood, not people, but it was all she had. She dragged it behind her, the rope biting into her palms as the cold wind whipped around her. By the time she returned to the ditch, her breath came in shallow bursts. She loaded the smaller man first, wrapping him in a tarp and blanket. The bigger one, Tank, she'd soon learn, helped lift his friend despite a bleeding arm. "You don't have to," he started. "I do," she said firmly. "You can walk if you're able." He nodded weakly, staggering beside her. The climb was slow and brutal. The snow deepened with every step, and her legs trembled from the strain. She stopped twice to catch her breath, chest burning, hands raw. But each time she looked back at the man on the sled, she felt that old fire again, the one that kept her going through nights of war and loss. At last, the cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, the door a dark rectangle against the white. Inside, warmth rushed to meet them. She cleared the table, spreading old sheets and blankets by the fireplace. Tank collapsed onto the rug, groaning softly. "Help me lift him," she said. Together, they moved the unconscious man to the blankets. She peeled off his soaked jacket and boots, whispering directions as if she still had a team beside her. The fire crackled, throwing orange light across the room. She filled a kettle and set it on the stove, her fingers shaking slightly. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and antiseptic, a mixture of past and present. She checked their pulses again, wrapped their feet and hands in warmed towels, and used her husband's old field kit to clean minor wounds. Tank's eyes opened halfway. "You, a nurse?" "Used to be," she said, squeezing his wrist to check his pulse. "Long time ago." He gave a faint smile. "We don't deserve this." "Deserving doesn't enter into it," she replied quietly. "You need help. That's enough." As the day brightened outside, the world began to move again. In the distance, a snowplow rumbled down the highway. The town would soon notice the wrecked bikes. She knew someone might come asking questions. She wasn't worried about that. Not yet. She made soup from chicken broth and potatoes, feeding the men by spoon until color returned to their faces. The smaller one, Danny, mumbled something about not meaning to scare anyone. "Rest," she said. "You'll explain when you're better." By late afternoon, the storm picked up again. Thick flakes brushed against the window, like feathers. Tank had managed to sit up, leaning against a pillow near the fire. "You could have called the cops," he said quietly. "I could have," she answered, folding another blanket. "Why didn't you?" She looked at him, the scar on his cheek, the tiredness in his eyes. "Because I saw two men who needed saving, not two criminals." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if that answer settled something deep inside him. When night fell, the cabin was silent, except for the crackle of burning logs. Elellanena sat by the fire, knitting absent-mindedly. The steady rhythm of the needles calmed her. She felt the ache in her back, the stiffness in her knees. Harold's photograph sat on the mantel, him in uniform, smiling like he used to before the illness. She looked at it now. "You'd tell me I'm foolish," she whispered, "dragging strangers home like stray dogs." But in her heart, she felt something warm, not foolishness, but purpose. It had been years since she'd felt useful to anyone. The next morning brought visitors. Sheriff Pete Hansen stood on her porch, snow still clinging to his boots. He was a big man with a kind face, but his eyes were full of concern. "Ella," he said, "you got a minute?" She stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." He stomped the snow off and entered, gaze landing immediately on the two men resting by the fire. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, "you're harboring hell's angels in your living room." "They had an accident," she said. "Ella, you don't know these fellas. They got records. Dangerous kind." She set her jaw. "They're humankind, and they're hurt." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're a stubborn woman." "Always have been." He gave a small smile. All right. I'll tell the boys at the station you've got it handled, but promise me you'll call if anything goes wrong. I promise, she said, though she had no intention of letting fear run the show. After the sheriff left, she poured herself a cup of tea. The house smelled of pine and wood smoke. Tank was awake again, watching her carefully. You trust people too easy, he said. No, she answered softly. I just choose not to fear them first. He stared into the fire. Nobody's ever said that to me before. Then maybe it's time someone did. That night, as she stood on the porch, the stars burned bright above Pine Valley. The air was cold enough to make her breath shimmer. Somewhere in the valley below, dogs barked and a truck engine turned over. Behind her, she heard Tank coughing and Danny shifting in his sleep. She felt tired, but alive in a way she hadn't for years. The quiet mountain air seemed to whisper something. That goodness, even small, still had weight in the world. She looked at Harold's coat wrapped around her and smiled faintly. Guess I'm not done yet, she said aloud, her voice carried off by the wind, and with that, she turned back inside, closing the door on the dark, but leaving a little light burning for whoever might still be out there. Morning came thin and grey, and the stove clicked in its slow heartbeat, warming the little cabin one log at a time. Frost drew feathery patterns on the window panes. Elellanena moved through the kitchen in her slippers, the floorboards cool underfoot, her breath finally steady after a restless night. She set the kettle on the front burner and touched the back of her hand to Danny's forehead. His skin had lost that alarming chill. His breathing was deeper now, his mouth relaxed. Tank, propped against two pillows by the hearth, lay awake with a blanket over his legs, staring into the moving fire as if it held a private message. Tea? She asked. Tank blinked, like he had been far away. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Her hands worked without hurry. Mug, string of a tea bag tugged loose, a spoon placed just so. A small act done the same way she'd done it for years. She poured, and the steam rose gentle as a prayer. You got a couple of cracked ribs, she told him. Breathing shallow helps with the pain, but don't go too shallow. I want air going in, and expect coughing. That's good. He nodded, eyes down. His big fingers turned the mug like a round stone. Feels like I got run over by a truck. You nearly did, she said. Tell me if you get dizzy again. A faint snore from the couch told her Danny had slid back into sleep. He had a smear of ash on his cheek, and his hair stuck up at odd angles. One of his hands hung off the side of the couch, fingers curled like a child's. She put a pot of oatmeal on the stove and added a little brown sugar and a pinch of salt. Nothing fancy. The sweet smell filled the room and wrapped itself around their shoulders. Tank watched her move with that quiet attention some men have when they're trying to understand a thing without asking too many questions. He looked like he was measuring his place in the room, where the coat rack stood, how far to the door, whether he was a burden or a guest. You need anything else? She asked, spoon in the pot. No, ma'am. He hesitated, as if the words might crumble. You didn't have to do all this. I know, she said. Eat while it's hot. He took the bowl with both hands like it might slip away. When the spoon touched his lips, his eyes closed. A low sound came out of him, half a sigh, half a thank you. Danny stirred and sat up too fast, winced, then settled again when she touched his shoulder. Easy, she said. You had a bad night. You're safe. You're warm. That's the order of things today. He blinked around the cabin, still finding his place in it. Smells like Sundays, he said, voice scratchy. "What do Sundays smell like?" she asked. "Like oatmeal," he said, then smiled, embarrassed. "And wood smoke, and, a quiet house that don't want anything from you." "That last part's rare," Tank said softly. Elellanena served them both and sat at the small table with her own bowl. The first spoonful always tasted the best, like a beginning. "I'm feeding them. I'm still useful," she thought, and that thought warmed her in a different way than the stove did. After they ate, Tank insisted on standing for a minute, which he did with a grunt and a hand on the mantel. His ribs protested. He smiled through it, a thin, white line of determination on his mouth. He was careful not to knock anything over, careful like a man walking in a house of glass. "I can do something," he told her. "Stack wood, sweep, give me a job, or I'll go crazy sitting like this." "You can rest," she said. He shook his head. "Rest don't sit well with me." Danny had found a small notebook in his pocket and a stub of pencil. He began to draw in tiny strokes, glancing up at the light, then down at the page. He drew the kettle first, then the curve of the mug, then the edge of her hand on the table. The pencil whispered against paper. When he noticed her watching, he flushed. "It calms me," he said, as if he needed permission. "You draw what you like," she told him. "Just don't draw me when I'm frowning at the bills." Tank tried a laugh and winced again. "We'll pay you back," he said. "You put a number to it, and we'll square up." She waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. "Let's get you both steady on your feet first." By late morning, the storm had settled into a lazy fall, flakes big and soft, floating down like they had nowhere else to be. Tank wrapped a scarf around his neck and insisted on carrying 2 small logs from the stack by the door to the hearth. He moved slow, measured, listening to his own breath the way she had told him. Danny shuffled to the window, where the glass had fogged in a breathy circle around his mouth, and drew what he saw. Trees bent with white, the powder on the fence posts, the porch rail where a bird's footmarks stitched a neat line. "You want to know a secret?" Danny said, after a while, his voice quiet, almost apologizing for itself. "I always wore the jacket and the boots because I liked the weight. It felt like something holding me down. Not enough to drown me, just enough to keep me from floating away." Elellanena nodded like she'd been told a tender fact. "We all got weights we choose," she said. He tilted his head, considering that. "I never had a place where nobody told me to stop drawing." "You do today," she said. Around noon, she took her grocery tote and decided to walk down to town. She left them with instructions about the stove, the tea, the wool blanket rolled near the rocker. Tank looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "We'll be fine," he said. "We'll be right here." "Lock the door if anyone knocks," she said. "Tell them I'll be back soon. Sheriff knows." The path down the ridge road was firm now, the snow tamped by her own steps from the day before. The cold pinched at her ears. Clouds hung low, the kind of sky that turned sound soft and made the valley feel closer. She took her time. The town's main street was a short run of businesses: hardware store, diner, the general store with its faded sign that had once been cheerful paint. A bell rang when she opened the door, and the smell of coffee and hay bales mingled in that old familiar way. "Morning, Miss Morrison," said Clara, the clerk with white blonde hair and a sweater that always had a cat hair or two on it. Clara was kind when she remembered to be, and sharp when she forgot. "Morning, Clara," Elellanena said, placing eggs, bread, bandages, and a little bag of sugar on the counter. "Weather's playing at being tough again." Clara's eyes flicked to the bandages. "You all right up there?" she asked. Sheriff said you had company. Elellanena glanced at the window where folks passed by, their faces framed for a second and gone. 2 men had a bad spill on the ridge. I dragged them in. They're breathing and warm now. Hell's Angels, I heard, Clara said, lowering her voice like someone might hear the words and grow them bigger. You be careful, Ella. Those men, well, I don't know them, but I know enough to worry. I know you worry because you care, Elellanena said, folding the bag. But they're just men today. That's what counts. Clara pursed her lips. Counting sometimes gets you in trouble. The words were small, but the space between them and kindness was thin. By the door, old Mr. Knowles pretended to study a display of fishing lures while he listened. When Elellanena turned, he made a show of tipping his cap. Always said you had more spine than the whole town, Ella. Just don't let that spine get you killed. We all die, she said mildly. It's how we live that's up for debate. She felt the room draw back a little, like folks weren't sure whether to admire her or shake their heads. She added a few oranges to the bag simply because the bright color pleased her. On her way out, she met Sheriff Pete coming in, the bell giving a bright note. You walking alone? He asked, glancing at her tote. Walking suits me, she said. They're fine. Resting. Pete leaned his big hand on the counter and lowered his voice. Some folks will talk. You know how it goes. A few of them called, wanting to know why I didn't haul your guests down. I told them the road's slick and a patient's a patient. But Ella, keep your phone near. I don't want trouble on that mountain. Trouble would need an invitation, she said. And I'm not planning a party. He tried not to smile and failed. I know better than to tell you what to do. Then he added softer, I also know better than to underestimate worry. On the way home, the snow gave up and sunlight broke through the thin veil of cloud. The path sparkled. Her breath came steady. Somewhere in the trees, a woodpecker tapped, patient and exact. She felt each step in her knees, the joints speaking their truth, and she continued anyway. At the cabin, she stomped snow from her boots and found Tank trying to fold laundry with one good arm. He paused, embarrassed. I thought, well, you did enough. I'll take the help, she said, and she meant it. Danny was at the table, drawing her front door. He had captured the place where the paint had peeled in a long curl near the handle, and the crack in the second plank from the bottom where a nail had split the wood years ago. He drew the small dent in the tin pitcher by the stove, the one Harold had dropped one night and laughed about for a week. When she saw it on the paper, the dent looked like a memory you could touch. In the afternoon, clouds thickened again, and the light turned hollow. Danny's color drained around 4 o'clock, and a tremor started in his left hand. The aftershock of cold had a way of returning like a tide. Elellanena wrapped him in a warm blanket and rubbed his back the way a mother might soothe a fevered child. Tank watched, his face open and hurt, like he couldn't stand to see anyone cared for that way without feeling something he didn't have a name for. That night, a branch scraped the roof. Somewhere in the valley, a small explosion echoed. Maybe a propane tank. Maybe someone's late-night trouble. Tank flinched so hard, he knocked the mug beside him. The sound broke into him like a door kicked open. His chest heaved. He wasn't here anymore. Tank, Elellanena said in a low voice, hands steady as stones. Look at me. Count your breath with me. In and out. We're in the cabin. We're safe. Hear the stove? Smell the pine? That's where we are. His eyes struggled to focus. He brought his hands to his ears like he could shut out a war only he could hear. His jaw shook. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry. You're fine, she said. softer still. You're home for now. Just here. They counted together. He mirrored her pace, and the shudder came out of his body in slow waves. When he settled, he was ashamed. He wiped a hand across his face and looked down. I don't like people seeing me like that. I don't like sneezing in church, she said. But both things happen. He made a small surprise sound that might have been a laugh. You say the strangest things, he said. Helps us both, she answered. Later, when they were asleep, she sat by the window with a blanket around her and watched the snow drift. The dark had a texture to it she loved, not empty, but quiet, full of held breath. She let her eyes close and drifted to a tent long ago, the dim green of canvas, the smell of antiseptic, the soft murmur of men speaking in whispers because anything louder was too much. A younger version of herself moved between cots, hands sure, voice simple. You're here. Breathe with me. I've got you. I've still got someone, she thought. For a little while longer, I've still got someone. The next few days settled into a kind of rhythm. Morning tea, small bites of food, a few steps walked, then a few more. Danny's drawings spread across the table like small windows to a calmer world. He drew Tank's hands because he said they were interesting. Big, scarred, strong, hands that could break things or fix them, depending on the moment. He drew Elellena's rocking chair and the way her shawl draped over the back like a sleeping cat. He drew the pewter spoon with the nick near the bowl and the steam rising from a pot in a wavering ribbon. They talked without digging too deep. Tank said his daughter lived 2 states over, that he hadn't seen her in years, that she had a laugh he still heard when he was tired and trying not to remember anything else. Danny said he used to draw on the backs of paper placemats in cheap diners and leave them for whoever cleared the tables. He liked thinking someone might find them and stop chewing for a second and actually see something. Some things were left unsaid, tucked behind the careful lines of their days. The unsaid things still sat with them, though, like polite guests waiting for their moment. On the 3rd morning, a knock came. Quick, nervous. Elellanena opened the door to find Mrs. Klein from the church committee, bundled to the eyebrows, holding a foil-covered casserole pan with oven mitts like the pan might try to escape. I brought tuna noodle, Mrs. Klein said, looking past Elellanena into the room with a gaze that gathered everything. Blankets, boots, the shadow of 2 figures by the fire. I figure you're feeding more than yourself these days. That's kind, Elellanena said. Come in a minute, warm up. Mrs. Klein took 1 step over the threshold and stopped, like the floor was a line she wasn't sure she should cross. No, I can't stay. Well, I don't agree with you bringing them here, Ella. I hope you know that. But disagreeing isn't the same as seeing you starve. So here. Thank you, Elellanena said, and meant it. Mrs. Klein nodded crisply and left. As she went, Danny lifted a hand in a small, uncertain wave. She didn't wave back, but her jaw tightened in a way that meant she had seen him. After lunch, a different kind of visit arrived. 2 men, in heavy jackets, neighbors from down the valley, pulled up in a pickup and stood by the porch steps. They didn't cross the line. Their faces had the look people wear when they think they should be brave, but aren't sure yet what that looks like. You got our number if you get in a bind, the tall one said to Elellanena. We can be here quick. That's generous, she said. The shorter one scuffed his boot. We don't like the colors those boys wear, he admitted, but a storm's a storm. You need a hand, we'll show up. She nodded, a quiet relief opening like a small door inside her chest. That's the old way of things, she said. Neighbors first. Neighbors first, he repeated. And they left, the truck's tailpipe steaming into the cold like a tired horse. The town itself was more complicated. News traveled faster than trucks. At the diner, Pastor Joel preached careful words about safety and kindness, about praying from a distance. In the barber shop, 2 men said she had lost her mind, and one said he wished he had her courage, and both statements were true in their own ways. At the school, a teacher told her class that sometimes people need help, even if they scare you a little, and a child raised a hand to ask if monsters need help too. The teacher paused the right amount of time before saying, "We help first. We figure the rest out later." On the 4th night, someone hammered a sign into the snow near the cabin's path. It was an old piece of plywood with crooked black letters, "Go home." The irony made Elellanena smile because she was home and had been for decades. Still, when she pulled the sign up and leaned it against the shed, a line drew tight in her chest. She rubbed it away with her thumb. She told no one about it. Some things you don't feed. That same night, Tank stood on the porch, looking across the valley, his breath a steady fog. "We could go," he said. "We've taken too much. Trouble's piling up. I got no right to sit under your roof and let folks stare cross-eyed at you because of us." "I don't host people to collect praise," she said. "Praise is loud and goes home early. Kindness stays to do the dishes." He looked at her for a long time. "You talk like my grandma used to," he said. "How'd she talk?" she asked. "Plain and sure," he said. They were quiet a while. Down in the valley, a dog barked twice. A train far off made a low sound, more feeling than noise. The sky turned the color of old pewter and then let go of the light. On the 5th day, the internal weather changed. Sheriff Pete came up with that careful look he wore when he had news he didn't want to deliver. He took off his hat when she opened the door, held it in front of him like he'd been taught to stand in the presence of someone he respected. "I had a call," he said. "From the county. Someone filed a complaint. Says you're operating a clinic without a permit." "This is my living room," she said, a thread of humor on the words to keep them from cutting. "And a pot of soup." "They don't care what we call it," he said. "They care what it looks like. And it looks like you got patience. They want me to come up here with an ambulance and move these boys. You moving them might kill them," she said steady. "I know," he said. His eyes were tired. "I told them we're in a storm, and we got a plan. And moving folks in this weather is foolish, but they'll come day after tomorrow if they don't hear from me that things have changed." "What does changed mean?" she asked. "Either they're gone," he said, "or you are." She stared at him, not angry, not even surprised, just held for a moment in that cold truth. "I'll write the county," she said. "Tell them I'm not running a business. I'm hosting guests." "They don't read letters," he said softly, as if that were the saddest fact he knew. "They read forms." He went after a while, leaving the room smaller than it had been. She put her hands on the back of the chair, the wood smooth from years of use. "This is the part where sacrifice comes," she thought. "This is where kindness looks inconvenient and foolish and dangerous, and we find out if it is made of paper or stone." That afternoon, a different kind of storm rolled across the valley. Wind like a train, trees bending, snow lifting off the ground and flying sideways. The sky went dark in the early hours, and the house creaked like an old ship. When the power snapped off, the cabin sighed into a deeper quiet. Elellanena lit 2 oil lamps and put them in safe places, their small flames steady as heartbeat monitors. Danny had never loved storms. He paced with the blanket around his shoulders, his pencil useless in the poor light. Tank listened to the wind and fell quiet in that too still way that meant he was taking care not to split open again. Sometime after sundown, a light bobbed outside, a flashlight, skittering. Voices rose, then fell back, like waves slapping a boat. She opened the door to find 3 men on the porch, Mr. Knowles, young Billy Nance, and a third man she didn't know with a flushed, angry face. Snow swirled in behind them. "You got to send them down," the third man said without greeting. "I saw their bikes at the ditch. I know who they are. This ain't a house, it's a threat." "They're staying until it's safe to move," she said. "You thinking about our kids?" he shot back. "You thinking about my wife alone when I'm on night shift? Those men bring others. Others bring trouble." "Fear brings trouble faster," she said. Billy looked miserable. "Maybe we can talk about this tomorrow," he said. "Weather's not helping." Mr. Knowles put a hand on the angry man's arm. "We came to petition," he said, "not to push." "You do your petitioning on your porch," the third man snapped. "I'm going in there and calling the county myself." He took a step, and Tank rose, slowly but unmistakably, hand up, palm open. His face was calm, eyes soft. "We don't want trouble," he said. "We're not making any. We're trying not to die on your road." "Words are cheap," the man said. The wind shoved him, and he pushed back against it like he could fight air. One of the lamps flickered as a draft hit it, and a small arc of flame licked the edge of a paper Danny had left too near. Danny jumped, grabbed for it, and knocked the lamp sideways, the wick bouncing against the table. "Move," Elellanena said, voice cutting clean. She smothered the small flame with a wet dish rag, the room filling with the smell of singed oil and cloth. She looked up to see the men on the porch, frozen halfway between anger and fear, as if they had both nearly gotten what they wanted and hadn't liked the look of it. "We're done tonight," Mr. Knowles said suddenly, voice firm. In that way old men can muster when they remember how to stand in a wind. "We'll take this up down in town when nobody's about to burn their house down." The third man glared, but he followed them off the porch. Snow swallowed their shapes. Inside, the fire hissed as a knot of sap popped. Danny held the rescued paper against his chest, like a child with a toy. Tank stood very still, as if the only thing keeping him upright was the promise not to make anything worse. Elellenena's hands trembled only after the danger was gone. She put the lamp where it belonged, then sat at the table, folded her hands, and pressed them together until the tremor passed. "That one's on me," Danny whispered. "I got careless." "No," she said. "That one's on the wind." Tank looked at the door like it might open again and deliver something they truly couldn't handle. "We should go before morning," he said. "When it quits for an hour. We'll walk if we have to. A truck will pick us up from the main road." "You won't make it a mile," she said. "And you know it." He swallowed. "I can't let you lose this place over us." "You won't," she said. But a part of her knew that wasn't a promise she had the power to keep. Rules could be louder than reason. Penalties could arrive wearing polite jackets and carrying forms. The night stretched. Danny moved to the couch and drew by lamplight. Careful now. Tank watched him for a time, then spoke without looking away. "My girl's name is Emma," he said. "She's 13. Last I heard. I got a photo from when she was 9. She's holding a popsicle and laughing at the way it dripped on her shoes. I don't know if she remembers me in any way that's good. I don't know if I deserve it if she does." Danny's pencil slowed. "You could call," he said. Tank made a face like a man turning a key in a lock that might have rusted shut. "I count reasons not to," he said. "Then I run out and start counting what-ifs." Elellanena listened with her head tilted, the way Harold used to listen to a radio game when the signal was bad and he was trying to catch the sense of it. "She eats popsicles," she said. "That's a good sign." Tank barked a surprised laugh that made him quits. "You turn everything into a sign." "No," she said. "I notice the ones that matter." Silence settled again, thicker now, heavier. The stove ticked with cooling metal. The lamp flame thinned and steadied. Somewhere outside, snow slid off a branch and hit the ground with a soft thud. Toward morning, the wind finally let go, and that kind of quiet came that has a weight to it, a hush that folds itself around the edges of things. Elellanena rose, put on coffee, and stood a long time by the window. Maybe goodness isn't enough against paperwork, she thought. Maybe they'll take this choice from me, and I'll have to watch two men walk away into a storm that isn't finished with them yet. She realized then that her mouth had gone tight, a straight line like the edge of a folded letter. She forced herself to soften it, the way she used to, before smoothing a bandage onto fragile skin. When the men woke, she kept it simple. "We'll face it," she said. "Together, if you'll let me." Tank nodded once, as if that word hit a place that was sore and brave both. Danny looked at the table and then at her. He pushed a small piece of paper across the wood toward her with the carefulness of a man delivering his heart. It was a sketch of her hands, not pretty hands, knuckled and veined, a little bent with work, a nick on the thumb from last summer's pruning. But the way he'd drawn them made them look like hands that could hold a person up for a long time without dropping them. "For you," he said, voice rough. She swallowed. "It's more honest than a mirror," she said. He pointed at the scar on the drawn thumb. "You're allowed to be careful of yourself too," he said. "Just saying." She tucked the sketch under the salt bowl like a treasure a robber would miss. That afternoon, a group gathered at the base of the ridge, people with opinions and hats pulled low. They didn't come up, but their presence sat at the edge of the day, a dark shape that wouldn't quite name itself. Sheriff Pete's truck idled on the road for a while, his figure a steady post among moving ones. After an hour, the group drifted away, like smoke that had forgotten its fire. Supper was quiet. The tuna noodle casserole sat heavy and comforting on the plates. The lamp hummed softly. When she reached to clear Tank's plate, his hand touched her wrist, not grabbing, just settling there as if to keep the world from rolling. "If they make us go," he said, "I'll still think of this place when I need to remember something good." She nodded, the picture of the porch in summer and the sound of bees in the clover blooming in her mind. "I will too," she said, and smiled to take the sting from the words. After dishes, she took her coat from its hook and went out to the porch with 2 mugs. She handed one to the night, as she always did, the old habit that felt more sensible than most new rules. The mug warmed her palms. The other sat on the railing, catching the starshine in a small, bright ring. "Harold," she thought, "I might have done a foolish thing, but if it's foolish to keep somebody warm and breathing, I'd rather be foolish than tidy." Down in the valley, a dog barked again, once, then settled. The mountain breathed, and inside the cabin, 2 men lay under her roof, held for a short time in a circle of warmth that would have to stretch farther than it seemed able. She let the cool air sting her cheeks, the way it used to when she and Harold would sit out here and talk about nothing at all, the kind of nothing that meant everything. Then she took the spare mug from the rail and went back inside, closing the door with a soft click as if to tell the world, just for the night, that the choice here was made. The morning after the storm was so still, it felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Snow rested thick and bright on every branch, glinting in the slow return of sun. The air smelled clean, wood smoke and pine, the kind of sharpness that woke the heart before the mind caught up. Elellanena stirred the embers in the stove with a poker, watching sparks leap like tiny, stubborn stars. Tank and Danny were still asleep, their breathing steady. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a few quiet minutes just to stand there, hands around a mug of coffee, eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, the world was dazzling and pure, but she knew how quickly that could change. She had done what she believed was right. Now the question was what would come of it. It was close to noon when Sheriff Pete Hansen trudged up the hill again. His truck couldn't climb the iced-over road, so he came on foot, hat pulled low, breath fogging in the bright air. Elellanena met him at the porch, broom in hand. "Pete," she said, sweeping the last of the drifted snow aside. "I figured I'd see you sooner or later." "Sooner," he said, wiping his boots. "County's coming tomorrow morning. They sent papers." "Papers don't scare me," she said, but her voice was softer than she meant it to be. Pete looked past her shoulder, into the cabin. Tank was sitting up, carefully stretching. Danny was folding blankets. Both stopped when they saw the uniform. Pete lifted a hand in a peaceable way. "No one's here to drag anyone off, not today. Just checking. You all right, Ella?" She nodded. "We're fine." He lowered his voice. "And them?" "Alive," she said. "And thankful, I think." Tank came closer, leaning on the table for balance. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you got my word. We ain't here to make trouble. We're healing. Then we'll be gone." Pete studied him for a moment, then looked at Elellanena again. "You see what you've done, don't you? Whole town's arguing. Half say you're a saint, half say you've lost your wits." Elellanena gave a small, dry smile. "Sounds about right." He exhaled, breath pluming in the cold air. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. But once the county's involved, it's politics. They like paperwork better than people." "Let them come," she said simply. "I'll have soup ready." Pete chuckled despite himself, shook his head, and turned back toward the hill. "You always did make the rest of us look small," he said. She watched him go, snow crunching beneath his boots, his figure growing smaller against the white. A part of her ached for him, for all the good men who tried to keep rules gentle and ended up bruised by them. That afternoon, when the sun had begun to soften and the snow glowed gold, the sound came, a low, steady rumble climbing up the road. Not trucks this time, motorcycles. Elellanena stepped to the window and watched as the first glint of chrome appeared through the trees. Tank's face went pale. Danny's pencil froze mid-line. "Mike," Tank muttered. "Who's Mike?" she asked. "The man who keeps us breathing," he said, "and the one who'll want to know why we accepted help from a stranger." Elellanena didn't move from the window. "Then let's tell him the truth." The engines idled down near the yard. 8 riders in leather jackets dismounted, boots sinking into snow. Their leader was a heavy-set man with gray streaks in his beard and eyes like slate. He walked with purpose, every motion quiet but weighted, like he'd spent a lifetime carrying both authority and regret. He stopped a few feet from the porch. "Which one of you's Mrs. Morrison?" "I am," she said, stepping outside. The cold caught her cheeks, but her posture stayed straight. "You must be Iron Mike." He raised an eyebrow. "They talk about me?" "They said you'd come," she replied. Behind her, the door creaked as Tank appeared in the doorway, leaning on the frame. Danny hovered behind him, thin and pale. Mike's gaze shifted to them. "You two make a habit of scaring old ladies?" Tank shook his head. "No, sir. She saved us." "Looks that way," Mike said. "You think I'd let that slide without knowing why?" Elellanena folded her arms, Harold's coat hanging loose at her sides. "You're welcome to come in and ask," she said. "But wipe your boots. I keep a clean floor." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, then a small grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You heard the lady," he told his men. "Boots off." The cabin felt suddenly smaller with 9 large men inside. Leather, snow, and gasoline mingled with the scent of burning wood. Elellanena moved calmly between them, refilling the kettle, setting out cups. Mike watched her as though trying to understand a species he hadn't seen before. "You don't scare easy, do you?" he said. "Scaring's a waste of time," she replied. "People get hurt while you're busy being afraid." He gave a low laugh. "You talk like a soldier." "I was a nurse," she said. "Korea. 2 years." That silenced the room. The men exchanged glances. Mike sat back in his chair, expressions softening. "My old man was over there. Said the nurses were tougher than the grunts." "We had to be," she said. "There wasn't anyone else." Tank and Danny watched, hardly daring to breathe. This wasn't the confrontation they'd expected. "So," Mike said, leaning forward, "you risk your neck for my boys. Whole town's about ready to run you out. What's your angle, Mrs. Morrison?" "No angle," she said. "Just 2 lives worth saving." He stared at her a long time. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "Fair enough." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the snow. "They tell you what we are?" "Didn't have to," she said. "I can read a patch. Doesn't change what I saw." "And what was that?" 2 men freezing to death. He turned back, studying her again. "You could have let them lie." "Could have," she said. "Didn't." A quiet moment stretched, heavy but peaceful, like 2 worlds finding a place to meet. Finally, Mike smiled. A small, genuine thing. "You remind me of my grandmother. Mean as a switch, but heart like gold." Elellanena chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said. Then, more serious, "They'll stay till they're steady. Then, I'll take them. And if anyone in town gives you grief, they'll answer to me." "That won't be necessary," she said gently. "I can handle myself." "I believe that," he said. "Still, consider it a gesture of respect." He extended his hand, a hand that had probably broken bones and carried brothers to safety alike. She shook it, her grip firm. For a moment, the room was utterly still, except for the pop of the fire. That night, after they left, the quiet returned thicker than before. Tank sat at the window, eyes distant. "Didn't expect him to take it that way," he said. "Neither did I," Elellanena replied, folding a blanket. Danny was sketching again, the curve of the firelight on Tank's face, the lines of exhaustion under Elellanenna's eyes. "You sure he won't be mad we stayed here?" Danny asked. Tank shook his head. "Mike's got a soft spot for people who don't scare. Reminds him of his mother, I think." Elellanena smiled faintly. "Then I'll take that as a good sign." She sat down, letting her knees sigh into the chair. The smell of the day still lingered. Oil, snow, smoke, and something else. A hint of trust beginning to form in the cracks of fear. Tank stared into the fire. "You know," he said quietly, "I joined the club after the war. Needed noise louder than what was in my head. The bike gave me that. The brothers gave me rules. Rough ones, but clear." She listened, saying nothing, only nodding. "When it's quiet," he continued, "I still hear the sand, the rotor blades, the screams, Nights like that, you start thinking nobody decent could stand near you again. Elellanena looked at him gently. That's not true. He met her eyes. You make it feel less true. Across the room, Danny stopped sketching for a moment. She does that, he said. Makes the noise in your head slow down. Elellanena smiled, feeling her throat tighten. Then we're all doing some healing, I guess. 2 days later, a note arrived, slipped under her door, in an envelope smudged with engine grease. It was written in large, careful letters. Mrs. Morrison, we'd be honored if you came down to the clubhouse next Sunday. We owe you a meal and a proper thank you. Mike. She stared at it for a long moment, then set it on the table. Tank grinned weakly. You don't have to go. I know, she said, but maybe I want to. Sunday came clear and cold. The sun threw light, like shards, through the pines. Elellanena, dressed in her warmest coat, brushed her hair and pinned a small silver brooch at her collar, Harold's old army medic pin. The clubhouse sat on the edge of town, half hidden behind a scrapyard. The sound of laughter and country rock music carried faintly through the open door. When she stepped in, the noise fell quiet. A dozen men turned, all leather and beards and tattoos, and yet not a single one of them looked hostile. Mike stood from his chair. Gentlemen, he said, this is the woman who saved our brothers. Show some manners. Ma'am, they said almost in unison. She laughed softly. Didn't expect such good manners from a biker gang. Club, Mike corrected with a grin. We're trying to change the reputation. Tank and Danny were there too. Cleaned up, faces shaved, eyes clear. Danny held out a small canvas, shyly. It was a painting of her cabin under snowfall, the windows glowing warm. For you, he said. She touched the edge of it, reverently. It's beautiful, Danny. Can't repay you, he murmured. You just did. They sat her at the head of the long wooden table. Someone said grace, rough, short, but honest. The meal was loud and human, filled with jokes and clattering plates. As she looked around, Elellanena saw something she hadn't seen in years. A family, imperfect and patched together, but real. She caught Mike's eye. You boys aren't half as bad as people think, she said. He chuckled. Don't tell the newspapers. We've got a reputation to maintain. After the meal, Mike walked her to her car. The afternoon light fell soft over the yard, glinting off the bikes, lined up like horses waiting to ride. Mrs. Morrison, he said, I wasn't kidding about respect. We could use someone like you, someone who doesn't flinch. She raised an eyebrow. What for? Sometimes things go wrong out there. Wrecks, fights, bad calls. We patch ourselves up with duct tape and hope. You know better ways. She smiled. You're asking me to be your nurse. Our angel, more like, he said, then quickly added, if that doesn't offend you. She laughed. I've been called worse. Then we're agreed, he said. When we need you, we'll knock. No secrets, no trouble. She shook his hand again, firmer this time. All right, Iron Mike, but I charge in cookies. He laughed, a full, booming laugh that echoed off the metal walls. That night, back at her cabin, Elellanena sat by the fire and looked at the painting Danny had given her. Snowflakes drifted against the window, melting slowly on the glass. Her house smelled of coffee and pine and something new, possibility. She thought of Harold, of the young soldiers she'd once comforted, of the years spent waiting for purpose to knock again. It finally had, just wearing leather instead of uniform. She smiled, small and steady. You'd laugh at me, Harold, she murmured, but I think you'd understand. Outside, far down the valley, the sound of motorcycles rose, not harsh, not wild, but steady and rhythmic, like the beating of a distant heart. She closed her eyes and listened until the sound faded into the mountain's breath. The months that followed unfolded gently, like pages turning in a well-worn book. Winter slipped into spring, and the snow gave way to green shoots that pushed stubbornly through the thawing ground. Elellenanena's cabin, once the loneliest spot on Pine Ridge, began to hum with new rhythms. The riders kept their word. They came not in loud packs, but in twos and threes, engines soft, as if they knew this ground demanded respect. Sometimes they came with a scraped arm or a cut that needed cleaning. Other times they came with nothing more than a thank you and a story. To the surprise of everyone, including herself, Elellanena didn't mind. Her kitchen became a place where gruff voices softened and strong men learned the quiet power of listening. One bright morning, she found Tank splitting wood outside her shed, his breath visible in the cool air. The rhythmic crack of the axe blended with birdsong. "You're supposed to be resting that shoulder," she called from the porch, wiping her hands on a towel. He leaned on the handle, grinning. "Rest makes me stiff. This makes me steady." "Suit yourself," she said, though a smile tugged at her lips. Danny appeared moments later, carrying a box of paints. He'd been working on a mural for the school in town, an idea born from one of their fireside talks about making something lasting. He'd asked the principal for permission, and to everyone's astonishment, she'd said yes. "Mrs. Morrison," Danny said, setting the box on the porch rail, "I need a favor." "What kind?" "I want you to come see the mural when it's done. You're in it." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded, suddenly shy. "Just the spirit of you, not your face. You'll know where." Her chest warmed with something like pride. "Then I'll bring cookies for the whole class." That evening, the three of them sat on the porch as the sun went down over Pine Valley. The air smelled of sap and distant rain. Tank smoked a single cigarette, more out of habit than need, and Danny sketched the view in the fading light. Elellanena watched them quietly. The wind touched her hair. The world looked soft again. "You two know," she said. "I didn't plan for any of this." Tank chuckled. "Pretty sure none of us did." "I mean it," she said. "When I saw you that morning on the road, I almost kept walking." Danny turned to her. "But you didn't." "No," she said softly. "Guess I didn't." Silence settled over them. A comfortable silence, full of shared air and unspoken thanks. Word of her continued connection to the Hells Angels spread faster than spring mud. Some townsfolk frowned when she walked into the grocery. Others tipped their hats a little deeper. At the post office one afternoon, she overheard two women whispering by the stamp counter. "She's gone soft in the head," one said. "Maybe," the other answered. "Or maybe she remembers something we forgot." Elellanena smiled to herself and let the words pass. People said what they needed to until life taught them otherwise. But the town's opinion began to shift in unexpected ways. It started with a car accident outside the valley one rainy night. A father and his teenage daughter trapped in an overturned pickup. The first people to arrive weren't paramedics. They were Tank and two other riders. They pulled the door open with bare hands, wrapped the girl in their jackets, and stayed until help came. When Sheriff Hanson told the story at church the following Sunday, heads bowed differently. No sermon could have done more. A few weeks later, a notice went up. Town hall discussion. Pine Valley, community safety, and unity. Elellanena almost didn't go. She wasn't one for speeches. But Danny insisted, and Tank offered to drive her. The meeting took place in the old school gym. Rows of folding chairs creaked as people settled in. Sheriff Hansen stood at the front, his notebook in hand, while murmurs rippled through the crowd. When he asked for comments, Mr. Knowles, once one of her loudest critics, stood first. "I've lived here 50 years, he said. Seen good people do foolish things, and fools surprise me with goodness. I'll tell you plain, since those riders showed up, we've had less theft, less trouble, and more folks lending a hand when the plows break down. Make of that what you will." A few people clapped. Then, to everyone's surprise, Danny walked up to the front, his sketchbook under his arm. "I'm not good with words," he said, voice quiet but steady. "But Mrs. Morrison taught me something. She said kindness isn't about fixing people. It's about seeing them before they're lost." He turned his sketchbook around. On the open page was a charcoal drawing of Pine Valley, its streets, its cabins, its people, and in the center, light radiating from a small cabin on the ridge. "That's her house," he said, "but it could be anyone's if we want it to be." The room went quiet. Even the hum of the old lights seemed to pause. Then Sheriff Hansen cleared his throat and said, "I think that's about the best testimony we'll ever hear." Applause followed, slow, honest, unpolished. Elellanena felt her eyes sting. She didn't like being the center of attention, but she also knew when silence was the wrong response. She stood, hands clasped before her. "I didn't mean to Snowden," she said. "I just saw 2 men in the snow. That's all. The rest, well, kindness has a way of making its own plans." And with that, she sat down again, the applause growing louder, steadier, warmer. But peace never comes without one last test. Summer brought another motorcycle group through the region, the Riverside Riders, a rougher bunch led by a man called Skull Rodriguez. They'd heard rumors about the Pine Valley chapter going soft. One humid afternoon, their convoy roared into town, leather jackets flashing with rival insignias. Locals scattered. Sheriff Hansen was away in Helena, and tension prickled like static in the air. Mike and his men met them at the edge of the square. Elellanena arrived a few minutes later, breathless but calm, tank at her side. Skull, tall and tattooed from neck to wrist, sneered. "Heard you boys traded your chains for bake sales." Mike didn't rise to it. "Heard you traded yours for bad manners," he said. Laughter rippled through both groups, half tense, half amused. Then Elellanena stepped between them. "Gentlemen," she said, voice firm as a church bell. "If you're going to argue, do it after dinner. Nobody thinks straight hungry." A few chuckles broke the air. Even Skull blinked. "You're serious?" "I'm too old to joke," she said. "There's stew on the stove at my place. You want to talk about pride and family? You can do it over bowls and bread." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, against all odds, Skull's grin softened. "Lady," he said, "you're something else." He turned to his men. "You heard her. Let's eat before we fight." That night, a dozen rough men sat around Elellanenna's table. The cabin filled with steam, laughter, and the clatter of spoons. By the time dessert came, Danny's first attempt at apple cobbler, the tension had melted. When Skull left, he shook her hand with a grip surprisingly gentle. "You got more power than any preacher I ever met," he said. "I just cook," she said. "Yeah," he replied, "and somehow that's enough." 5 years passed. The seasons folded neatly, one into another. Pine Valley grew quieter, kinder. The bikers kept visiting, sometimes for stitches, sometimes for supper, sometimes just to sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Tank quit smoking, started calling his daughter every Sunday. One summer she came to visit, a tall, freckled teenager with her father's eyes and her grandmother's patience. They stayed in the guest room for a week, laughter spilling out the cabin windows like it had been waiting there all along. Danny became a local fixture, teaching art at the elementary school. The children adored him. He taught them how to paint with perfection. Every December, he led them in painting ornaments shaped like wings and hearts, which they left on doorsteps all over town. And Elellanena, she grew slower, but not smaller. Her hands trembled when she poured tea, but her eyes still carried the same steady light. The cabin on the ridge came to be known as the Pine Ridge Post. Folks would drop by with everything from a twisted ankle to a broken heart, and she would listen, patch, or feed as needed. When she turned 83, Sheriff Hanson and Iron Mike conspired behind her back. On a warm July evening, they brought her to the county courthouse under the pretense of needing her signature for some zoning nonsense. Instead, the entire community was there: families, riders, teachers, children. A banner hung from the rafters: Community Service Award, Elellanena Morrison for uncommon kindness and courage. The applause that greeted her was long and honest. Tank stood in the front row with Emma beside him. Danny held the school's mural, the one that showed the little cabin glowing against a dark valley. When the mayor handed her the plaque, Elellenanena's hands trembled slightly. She cleared her throat. "I don't have a speech," she said. "Never was one for fancy words. I just believe people need each other. That's it. You don't need to like someone to keep them alive. You just have to care enough to try." The crowd rose to its feet. The applause filled the hall, bouncing off the walls, spilling through the open doors into the summer night. Later that evening, back at her cabin, the air was soft and full of crickets. She sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, the plaque resting on her lap. Down the hill, the faint rumble of motorcycles drifted through the valley, steady, rhythmic, familiar. She smiled. "They'll scare the deer off again," she muttered, amused. The porch light flickered once, catching the framed painting Danny had given her years before. The cabin under falling snow, light glowing from its windows like a heartbeat. She reached out and traced the edge of it with a finger. "Harold," she whispered, "you'd laugh at all this fuss, but you'd be proud too, wouldn't you?" A breeze rustled through the pines, soft as an answer. She poured 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for the empty chair beside her, and watched the stars rise above Pine Valley. The sound of engines faded into distance. The night grew still again. Somewhere, a whippoorwill called once, twice. Elellanena lifted her cup. "To kindness," she said quietly. "The stubborn kind that doesn't quit." And the mountain, vast and quiet around her, seemed to nod in agreement.